My name is Dr. Richard Abbey. I'm here in Palo Alto, California, talking to you live about medication-free ways to treat ADHD. And so one of the things that people don't realize is that medication, when it's in your child's system, can boost their brain temporarily. About 20% of their symptoms will be minimized. And those things are things like sustained attention and simple attention. And beyond that, medication does not help with ADHD. Now, if those things were getting in the way of like planning, organization, and things, that may help a little bit. But the main thing you should know is that once medication is out of your child's system, it no longer treats them. So you could do medication for a year and stop, and you have the exact same brain. And so there was a time where I started looking into this because parents wanted more. They wanted more than just a temporary fix for their child. I'm working at Stanford, and I'm trying to figure out, what things are even possible. And essentially, I was working with a medically fragile population that would, the medical treatments would injure their brain, chemotherapy and radiation. So those things are terrible for the developing CNS, the developing child. And so I was trying to figure out a way that would help them. And through that, I discovered a way to help children with ADHD. And that is, if you can figure out what's going on in a child, what their relative weaknesses are, and even more importantly, where they are, and methods to strengthen those areas. So I think part of the difficulty is that, let's see here. Part of the difficulty with treating ADHD is that you got to be able to treat the individual and not just treat like research study participants, like big groups of people, 500 groups of people. You have to be able to treat a child and know what their symptoms are. So, part of what you do, you do a neuropsychological assessment, and you can figure out exactly what the child's strengths and weaknesses are. And through that, you can look at things that are neuropsychological strengths and weaknesses. So, working memory. Most people don't realize that working memory is the single biggest predictor of academic success. Working memory being that of holding information in mind and mentally manipulating it. So you can imagine this would be super important in math. It would be because you have to hold on to the information in your mind. You have to manipulate that information, and you come up with an answer. Now, if you can only do that in a very limited way, it's going to really be cumbersome when you're trying to figure out complex problems. And the same is true with reading. So you're reading away, and you are trying to figure out, what's happening in the story, what's going to happen, who are the characters, how are you going to make inferences and kind of bigger assumptions about the story or interpret it. That's where the working memory comes in. And so if you have a hard time focusing and paying attention, it's going to be really difficult to figure out like who those characters are and really comprehend and enjoy the reading, because you're going to have to read and reread. You're going to skip lines. Things don't make sense, and it's not fun. And so you end up not liking to read. And the problem with that is that people who, children who are reading are growing a knowledge base, especially when they get into nonfiction types of reading. In this area, that happens around, second, third grade. Kids are developing this massive data bank, this knowledge base. And so they're developing all this knowledge, and the kids who are not reading are not doing that. So there starts to become this, separation between them over time. And, one is really enjoying the learning process and gleaning all this information from what they read. And, the others who are having a lot of difficulty with reading are not having that same experience. And so that can be a huge problem, not only for reading and becoming a good reader, and not only for not building that data and that knowledge base. And part of that is if you are very familiar with a particular subject, it becomes way easier to read because there's less assumptions that you have to have. And let's see, somebody is... if you have questions while I'm streaming, go ahead and just list them out here, and I would be happy to answer them for you. So part of the problem is then also with not enjoying reading is you have a difficult time writing. So the best writers are the good readers. And so if you're not reading and your writing's not so great, you're going to start to struggle in school. The thing that happens into the future with ADHD is, so you're moving along, you're not creating this great knowledge base because you don't like to read because it's so hard to focus and pay attention. You skip lines and things don't make sense. Your reading is falling behind, your writing is falling behind, probably your spelling is falling behind as well. But as you move into, 5th to 6th grade and your executive functions are supposed to be coming into play, it becomes very difficult to plan and organize. And you're starting to be taught higher order concepts. And so one of the things I'm doing online right now, let me see if I can get that out of here, is I will be presenting on this topic, on ways in which you can build your child's brain. So if for whatever reason you can't make that, it will be on Tuesday next week, on February 13th from 10 to 11 o'clock. I'm going to go over this in a lot of detail. But suffice it to say, your child continues to move forward and struggles, and the planning, the organization, that's where the procrastination starts coming in. Things are done kind of at the last second or not at all. And as a parent, you start finding out about all these missing assignments and the grades and the stress. And a lot of times kids will start to have significant difficulties in middle school. But the smarter you are as a child, the more difficult it becomes to detect ADHD because you can compensate. So if you're a 6th grader and you're really smart and you can just plow into your homework and everyone's working on their 2-3 page paper for the past few weeks and you just power it out over an hour or two, then nobody really starts to notice. But eventually, when the bar is raised high enough, the weaknesses that come with ADHD that are not just sustained attention, that are not just short, spans of attention or switching your attention, but the executive functions. And so, somewhere along the line, if it's high school or college or, graduate school or even med school or law school, you're probably going to find yourself or your child is going to find themselves going to school with other adults at that point or other children, depending on where they are, equally as smart as them, that don't have problems with sustained attention, executive function, working memory, processing speed. And so it becomes incredibly difficult. So, that's what starts happening is there's this very difficult period where the child is struggling. And, maybe they keep that up, they get their degree, and they go on to have jobs and relationships where they struggle the rest of their life. But the amazing thing is if we can capture this somewhere in childhood, sometime when children are extremely willing to, work hard for a Pokemon card or, from praise from their parents or their coach, then essentially what you need to be able to do to change their future. Now, there's lots of different ways to do this, but you need to strengthen their brain. If you can strengthen their brain, then you got a shot at changing their future. And, we're sending people to Mars, we're sending people to the moon, we're building electric cars. We've been able to change brains for a long time. The difficulty comes within that is, well, how do you do that? This doesn't work and that doesn't work. And part of the problem with that is you can't take a one size fits all to everybody. So you can't be like, okay, let's take 500 people and give them this one thing and see how everybody responds. Well, come on. Like, that would be like going to a gym and, everybody has to do the powerlifting. And it's like, yeah, but I'm 90 years old. Like, it didn't work for you. Powerlifting doesn't strengthen 20% of the population. Yeah, but I'm only 3. Doesn't work. So the conclusion is powerlifting does not strengthen people's bodies. That's ridiculous. So you would go to a gym, and the 90-year-old might go and do, exercise in the pool, doing water aerobics, depending on what conditioning they're in. The 3-year-old might go to the kids' gym. The mid-20s might go do more modern exercise. Somebody who's been lifting weights or, my point is that there would be a lot of different things that people would do that would be effective. Like if you exercise, you're going to strengthen your body and you're going to increase your cardiovascular system. Known fact. So you can't say exercise doesn't work, just like you can't say brain training doesn't work. But, one technique for sure doesn't work for everybody. So then how do you know what works? Well, I guess you could do a bunch of trial and error yourself, or you could go to an expert who's been doing this for almost 2 decades, right? So, or, a team of people who have been doing that, and even better, maybe they have access to, over 40 different interventions and experience over time watching people do these things over the years, and who gets better. And, if it's not working for somebody, how do you adjust it? How do you nuance that particular program? Do you make it stronger? Do you make it weaker? Do you make it longer? Do you make it shorter? Do you, change what they're doing? How do you strengthen neurons? How do you make them speed up without medication? Or slow down if they're anxious? How do you connect them better? These are all pretty basic things to be able to do. And I say this as somebody who's been doing this for over 15 years. For somebody who has zero idea on how to do this, and unfortunately, many doctors are too busy to continue their training. Unfortunately, with managed care, you might get 15 minutes, if you're lucky, 30 minutes with your pediatrician for your annual child's checkup. They don't have time, and they don't even have the expertise or the time to get the expertise to do that kind of training. It's pretty easy and pretty basic to know what a child's neuropsychological strengths and weaknesses are, what is their verbal intellectual reasoning, their nonverbal intellectual reasoning. Generally, kids with ADHD, those are pretty good. Where they start showing a little bit of weakness is in performance-based types of measures. And by that I mean you have to look at a novel problem, maybe it's visual. You have to look at the details, so not the one that's almost right, but the one that is right. There's only one answer, and you have to do it quickly. So that's, of course, where children with ADHD start getting exploited in terms of their weaknesses. They don't do as well on those tests. They tend to have slower processing speed, especially with complex information. It takes them longer because they miss details. They have to go back. And for really smart children, sometimes the easy processing speed measures are easy for them, so you don't catch it. So you have to give them things that are more difficult, right? Working memory, same thing. They might, on super simple tasks, be able to say, oh, well, that's super easy. I can do that. But on a more complex task that has a very high load of working memory on it, you start to see their weakness. And you can actually do a brain map very easily. Go into somebody's office, look at 24,000 parts in terms of how are the neurons firing, how quickly are they firing, is there enough energy in there? If there is it going at the right speed compared to other kids who are developing normally? And so if we can just get over the fact that ADHD is just a term used for kids who have this lag in development in certain parts of their brain, in the neurons, in the axons, in their attention networks, in their executive function networks, and frankly, sometimes in lots of parts of their brain. It could be also in their language areas, or in their visual areas, or their auditory areas. So, we don't look at brains and see, oh, there's that one spot, and that means ADHD. Generally, there's a lot of things going on, and it's causing poor efficiency in processing. And it makes it incredibly difficult to pay attention. But, there's one label for a vast amount of variability in children. And that's made so, professionals can understand that better. And if you're looking at, the traditional method of treating them, with a physician doing, stimulant medication, extra time in school, maybe preferential seating, and you're on your way. That does zero for their future. Now, it might help them in their current classroom setting. It's not going to develop their brain any quicker. You take away that medication, they're left with the same brain. It did zero to develop their brain any faster in the areas that were lagging behind. And you got to understand that. That's okay. That that stagnation is kind of the separation over time of these children from their peers, where certain areas of their brain aren't developing. It'd be like, if you could see it, the child is shorter, or they have less weight or less muscle. But it's really hard to see in children with ADHD. Instead, you start to notice things like they're struggling in school, or they don't like school, or they're falling behind, and you're wondering why, so you get them a tutor. So when you finally discover what's going on, it's been happening often for a year or 2 years, and a lot of parenting advice. The teachers are trying to tell you what to do. You might get some tutors, and finally, you get some help. And you might, if you're lucky, discover what the problem is. And unfortunately, most people only get a solution or two, which really isn't a long-term solution. It's a Band-Aid. So if you took medication, and at the end of the day, it's going to wear off. And so that would be like putting a Band-Aid on a gushing wound, and at the end of the day, you take it off, and it's even worse. So you put the Band-Aid back on, or maybe you don't until tomorrow. And you continue that cycle until, until you don't take medication anymore. Typically, we see in long-term studies show people take medication on average for about 18 months. And the ones that do, the long-term study, the MTA study, done with multiple sites throughout the country, showed that that actually people don't end up in a different place. If you took medication as a young child, 8, 10 years old, for many years in front of you, versus the children who didn't, there's no difference. And so how do you explain that? Well, you explain that because stimulant medication, non-stimulant medication for ADHD only treats simple, sustained attention. How do I know this? Well, I've looked at the studies, and I've also retested multiple kids, even adults, but multiple kids on medication. They come back, hey, they have ADHD. The psychiatrists come back, simple, sustained attention looks better. Well, it's in their system. And then later, we look at things like working memory. We look at things like processing speed. They're still making mistakes in math. The processing speed is still slow. The working memory is still limited. The executive functions have not changed. There's no smart pill, unfortunately. And so, but you can actually do things to build the brain. So if you're doing working memory exercises, you can actually increase the working memory and strengthen it by 1 standard deviation. I've seen actually 3 standard deviations. I've seen people that didn't have problems with working memory strengthen it even further, and life was even easier for them. Pretty amazing. And so kind of looking at just that one thing, how do you increase that? And maybe that's not going to work for everybody. And how in the world would you know that? That's why you do an assessment. You look and see, what is the brain doing? If somebody has excessive low energy, there's techniques to improve that. So you might want to strengthen the brain so it's prepared to benefit better from exercises. It'd kind of be like you just broke your leg, and the cast has been on for 6 to 8 weeks, and you take it off. Of course, your muscles are going to be atrophied and need strengthening, and you probably ought to do that before you go and try to jump over the high hurdles again. So into the weight room you go strengthen them, or go to a physical therapist, whatever you want to do. I broke my kneecap and strengthened it myself. And, so you strengthen it, and then you can, learn the techniques, be more agile, and have better skills. And then you're better, right? The brain is way more adaptive than muscle. It can overcome. It's just incredible what the brain can do. We can learn multiple languages. We can learn, computer coding. We can learn all sorts of things at almost any age. If there's no kind of competing disease process like Alzheimer's, kids don't have Alzheimer's, then you can get better. You can strengthen your brain. If you can learn, you can strengthen your brain. And so, there might be techniques that look like video games. How fun. There may be things that you get to watch YouTube types of videos. That's super fun. Or movies. And you're controlling the interface with your brain. So it becomes this brain-computer interface. That can be amazing because the thing that you really want intrinsically, the movie having full color saturation or full volume is awesome. And so you want to do that. And so your brain is trying to make that happen. And when it happens, you feel this intrinsic reward, so you keep trying to do that. And essentially, you're actually exercising your brain. You can exercise 300 parts, 500 parts, second by microsecond. We can sample it 128 times a second and make calculations and determine how you're doing every quarter second. Essentially, you're doing about 3,000 brain push-ups over time, over 25 minutes. That's it. This is very concentrated. You don't have to go to the gym, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. You have to do brain training like that. You can do brain training a couple days a week and make significant progress, depending on where you're starting, depending on your learning rate. You can really make some huge differences. And so, when you look at ADHD and comorbid conditions, like, why would somebody have ADHD and dyslexia? Well, maybe some other parts of their brain were lagging behind as well. And you can figure out, what are the techniques to build those parts of your brain? And that's a really good point in, ADHD and comorbid dyslexia. The literature and the techniques that have been used for dyslexia over time, or Gillingham methods, phonological awareness building, these can really help. The research is very clear. Sally Shaywitz, Bennett Shaywitz out of Yale, I collaborated with them on a research project toward the end of my career at Stanford. And, what we found, what they found over every study they've done is that when people get better from reading interventions, that they're more accurate readers. They can get faster, but they're still slow and they still struggle. And so, they were trying, in this particular study we're doing, trying to figure out how to do that. how to help people overcome that. But essentially, when you are doing any of these interventions, you are changing the way the brain functions, right? And so when you're doing Orton-Gillingham methods, you are kind of impacting, you're trying to come from the surface and get down to the level of the neuron and their connections, and that's limited. There's techniques where you can actually go all the way into the level of the neuron and their connections and train that. And then if you use things like Orton-Gillingham methods, like, it's kind of like going in the brain gym and building the strength. And then you put on a layer of doing interventions, or even more importantly, how do you build the neuropsychological functioning? So kids often have weaknesses in processing speed, in working memory. If you've strengthened the brain, and then you do performance exercises to increase the processing speed, to increase the working memory, to increase the executive functions, and you put them in a reading program. We've had kids that have completely overcome dyslexia, who've completely overcome their ADHD. You can't, if they go somewhere for an assessment, they don't qualify for that anymore. So, I mean, you could say, well, maybe they didn't have ADHD. Well, maybe the majority of our clients never did. I think the big thing is that whatever they had, they overcame it. And so, these labels were created. A lot of people don't know this categorically. In the diagnostic manual that we call the DSM, by special groups, psychiatrists, psychologists. When I was at Stanford, we're working on this, and it's kind of based on opinion. Go look up autism right now, or social communication disorder. They're still fighting. They can't figure it out. You look at one kid with ADHD and another kid with ADHD, and their symptoms are all different. Well, how can that be? Well, you got to have, you have to qualify for certain ones on this one or that one. You could have ADHD just inattentive type. You could have ADHD just hyperactive type, or both. So there's 3 types, and it's all called ADHD. Yes. And there's 3 types, and do they all respond to medication the same way? No. Does medication heal their brain so they don't have it anymore? Nope. Does it wear off by the time they need to do their homework? Yep. Is it a long-term solution for kids who, you certainly, you take this for a year or 2 or 5 years, then your brain's better, right? Nope, it's not better. So, what do you do? Well, if you're going to have an impact into their future, you have to change their brain. You have to find a way to have it, instead of stagnating and falling further and further behind, you have to find a way that it actually gets better over time. Well, I am, let's see, I'm going to sign off now. I'll be on in a little bit. And I'm going to post some dates and links to my presentation coming up that will give you a lot more detail as to what you can do, how you can do it, where to go to be able to do these types of things. And thanks everybody for listening.